The first time I saw Blackrock Lighthouse, I knew it was hiding something. Perched on a jagged cliff, towering over the Atlantic like a forgotten sentinel, the lighthouse was technically my dream job. No neighbors, no distractions, just the ocean's roar and the occasional gull dumb enough to nest in a storm. The salty air filled my lungs, invigorating me as I stepped onto the weathered path leading to the entrance. The pay? Triple the usual rate. The catch? Never. Open the door. After midnight. The old keeper, a shriveled man named Hargrove, handed me the keys with a laugh that smelled like rotten fish. His eyes, clouded and sunken, seemed to hold secrets of their own. "You're the type who won't listen," he said, his voice gravelly and low. "But mark my words, what knocks after midnight isn't human." He leaned closer, his breath a mix of brine and decay, and I felt a chill run down my spine. I shrugged it off, dismissing his warnings as the ramblings of a man who had spent too many years alone in the dark. Ghost stories don't pay rent. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the rocky shore, I settled into my new routine. The lighthouse was a relic of a bygone era, its paint peeling and its structure creaking with age. I climbed the spiral staircase to the lantern room, where the massive Fresnel lens awaited my attention. Polishing it became a meditative ritual, the glass gleaming under my touch as I imagined the ships it guided safely home. Night fell quickly, and the isolation wrapped around me like a heavy blanket. I flicked on the radio, the static crackling to life, filling the silence with a haunting melody. The waves crashed violently against the cliffs, a constant reminder of the power of the ocean. I felt a sense of peace, a solitude I had longed for, but it was tinged with an unsettling awareness that I was not entirely alone. As the clock struck midnight, I found myself drawn to the door. The old keeper's warning echoed in my mind, but curiosity gnawed at me. What could possibly be out there? I peered through the peephole, my heart racing. The darkness beyond was impenetrable, and for a moment, I thought I saw a shadow flit past. I shook my head, dismissing it as a trick of the light. But deep down, I felt it. The weight of something lurking just beyond the threshold, waiting for the moment I would break the one rule I had been given. I turned away, forcing myself to focus on the tasks at hand, but the feeling of dread lingered, a constant reminder that Blackrock Lighthouse was not just a job, it was a gateway to something far more sinister. For weeks, it was paradise. The isolation of Blackrock Lighthouse became a sanctuary for my restless soul. Each night unfolded like a well-rehearsed play, a comforting routine that lulled me into a false sense of security. 11 p.m. I would climb the spiral stairs to the lantern room, the worn steps creaking beneath my weight. The air grew cooler as I ascended, filled with the scent of salt and old wood. Once at the top, I would polish the Fresnel lens, its glass surface reflecting the flickering light of the lantern. The lens was a masterpiece, a beacon of hope for lost sailors navigating the treacherous waters below. As I wiped away the dust, I imagined the countless lives it had saved, the ships it had guided safely home. 11:30 p.m. After ensuring the lens was spotless, I would radio the Coast Guard. "All clear," I'd say, my voice echoing in the stillness. The operator's voice crackled back, a lifeline connecting me to the outside world. I relished these moments, feeling like a guardian of the night, a solitary figure standing watch over the vast, dark ocean. 11:55 p.m. With the routine almost complete, I would double-check the door locks. It wasn't superstition, it was procedure. The heavy steel door felt reassuringly solid beneath my hands, a barrier between me and whatever lurked in the shadows outside. I had heard the stories from Hargrove, the old keeper, but I pushed them aside, convinced they were mere folklore meant to scare newcomers. Once satisfied that everything was secure, I would pour myself a steaming cup of coffee, the rich aroma filling the air. I settled into my chair, the creaking wood beneath me a familiar comfort. The static-filled AM radio crackled to life, filling the silence with a haunting melody that danced through the air. I would close my eyes, letting the music wash over me, drowning out the whispers beneath the waves. The ocean was alive at night, its voice a symphony of crashing waves and distant calls of seabirds. I often found myself lost in thought, contemplating the vastness of the sea and the mysteries it held. The lighthouse stood as a sentinel, a reminder of the power and unpredictability of nature. But then, everything changed. Until that night, it started like any other evening, the routine comforting in its predictability. I climbed the stairs, polished the lens, and radioed the Coast Guard. But as I settled into my chair with my coffee, a strange unease settled over me. The air felt thick, charged with an energy I couldn't quite place. I shook my head, dismissing it as fatigue. But as the clock ticked closer to midnight, the whispers grew louder. They were no longer just the sounds of the ocean. They were distinct, almost like voices calling out from the depths. I strained to listen, my heart racing. Was it just my imagination? Or was something truly out there, beckoning me to the door? I tried to focus on the radio, but the static seemed to shift, forming words that sent chills down my spine. I could have sworn I heard a name, a plea for help, but the moment I leaned in closer, it faded into nothingness. The clock struck midnight, and the atmosphere shifted. The familiar comfort of my routine felt like a fragile facade, cracking under the weight of an unseen presence. I glanced at the door, the heavy steel now feeling like a prison rather than a safeguard. That night, I realized I was no longer just a keeper of the light. I was a prisoner of my own curiosity, teetering on the edge of a darkness I had yet to comprehend. The whispers grew louder, and I knew that my routine was about to be shattered, plunging me into a nightmare I could never have anticipated. It sounded almost polite. November 12th, 12:11 a.m. The clock's chime echoed through the lantern room, a stark reminder of the hour. I had just settled into my chair, the warmth of my coffee still lingering on my lips, when it came, a soft, rhythmic tap-tap-tap on the reinforced steel door. It was not the wind howling through the cracks, nor the scurrying of some animal seeking shelter. No, this was different. This was the unmistakable sound of knuckles rapping against metal. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. The rules screamed in my head, "Don't open IT," but logic kicked in, battling against the instinctual fear that gripped me. What if it was a shipwreck survivor? What if someone had braved the stormy seas and was now pleading for help? The thought sent a jolt of adrenaline through my veins. I glanced at the door, its heavy frame looming ominously in the dim light. The old keeper's warning echoed in my mind, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being drawn into a decision that could change everything. I approached the peephole, my breath hitching in my throat. Peering through the small opening, I was met with nothing but darkness. The moonlight barely illuminated the rocky outcroppings outside, casting eerie shadows that danced in the fog. I squinted, trying to discern any movement, any sign of life, but there was only the stillness of the night. "Who's there?" I yelled, my voice trembling slightly. The words felt hollow, swallowed by the vastness of the ocean beyond. Silence. The kind of silence that presses down on you, heavy and suffocating. I stepped back, my mind racing. Perhaps it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. I turned to return to my chair, but then I heard it, a wet, choking sound emanating from inside the walls. My heart dropped. It was a sound I had never heard before, a grotesque gurgle that seemed to echo through the very bones of the lighthouse. I felt a chill creep up my spine, and I instinctively pressed my ear against the cold steel door, straining to listen. The sound came again, a desperate rasping that sent shivers coursing through me. It was as if something was trapped, clawing at the insides of the lighthouse, begging for release. I stumbled back, my mind racing with possibilities. Was it a trick of the wind? A figment of my overactive imagination? Or was there truly something lurking just beyond the door? I glanced at the clock again, 12:13 a.m. Time felt suspended, each second stretching into eternity. The knocking resumed, more insistent now, a rhythmic plea that tugged at my heart. I could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on me. I took a deep breath, my hands trembling as I reached for the doorknob. The cold metal felt foreign against my skin, and I hesitated, the old keeper's warning echoing in my mind. But the thought of leaving someone out there, alone and in distress, gnawed at my conscience. Just a quick peek, I whispered to myself, my resolve wavering. I turned the knob slowly, the sound of the latch clicking echoing in the silence. But before I could pull the door open, The knocking stopped abruptly, replaced by an eerie stillness that filled the air. My heart raced as I stood frozen, caught between the urge to help and the instinct to protect myself from whatever lay beyond. In that moment, I realized that the night was no longer just a backdrop to my routine. It had transformed into a living entity, filled with secrets and shadows that threatened to consume me whole. The morning light filtered through the grimy windows of Blackrock Lighthouse, casting long shadows across the floor. I awoke with a sense of dread, the events of the previous night replaying in my mind like a broken record. The knocking, the choking sound, it all felt like a fever dream, yet the weight of it lingered, heavy and suffocating. I needed answers, and the only place to find them was Hargrove's desk. With a sense of urgency, I tore apart the small, cluttered office that had once belonged to the old keeper. Papers were strewn everywhere, old logs, weather reports, and faded photographs of the lighthouse in its prime. My heart raced as I rifled through the disarray, searching for anything that might explain the horrors I had experienced. Then, beneath a pile of yellowed papers, I found it, a waterlogged ledger, its pages curling and stained. I pulled it free, my hands trembling as I opened it. The ink was smudged, but one entry stood out, circled in red ink as if it had been marked for emphasis. December 14th, 1987. Opened the door. Saw her. Now it's too late. A chill ran down my spine. The words felt like a warning, a ghostly echo from the past that resonated with my own fears. Who had Hargrove seen? What had happened after he opened that door? I flipped through the pages, desperate for more context, but the entries were sparse and cryptic, filled with ramblings about shadows and whispers that grew louder each night. Attached to the ledger was a grainy photograph, its edges frayed and yellowed with age. I held it up to the light, squinting to make out the details. The image depicted the lighthouse, but something was off. The structure appeared to be covered in handprints, hundreds of them, smudged and faded, as if someone had pressed their palms against the walls in a desperate attempt to escape. But they weren't on the outside. They were under the paint. My breath caught in my throat as I realized the implications. The lighthouse had been painted over, but the marks remained, trapped beneath layers of whitewash. What had happened here? Had Hargrove been the only keeper to experience this? Or had others before him faced the same fate? I felt a wave of nausea wash over me as I considered the possibility that I was not the first to encounter whatever haunted this place. The journal entries hinted at a darkness that had seeped into the very foundation of the lighthouse, a malevolence that thrived in the isolation of the cliffs. I flipped back to the entry, my fingers trembling as I traced the words with my fingertip. Saw her. Who was she? The thought of a figure lurking in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike, sent chills down my spine. I could almost hear the whispers again, echoing in my mind, urging me to uncover the truth. As I sat there, surrounded by the remnants of Hargrove's life, I felt a sense of urgency. I had to know what had happened to him, to understand the darkness that had taken root in this lighthouse. The knocking from the night before replayed in my mind, and I realized that I was now part of a story that had begun long before I arrived. With renewed determination, I resolved to dig deeper. I would uncover the secrets hidden within these walls, even if it meant confronting the very thing that had driven Hargrove to madness. The lighthouse was no longer just a job. It was a puzzle waiting to be solved, and I was determined to piece together the fragments of its dark history before it consumed me whole. The days blurred together in a haze of unease and dread. I tried to maintain my routine, but the atmosphere in Blackrock Lighthouse had shifted. The air felt thick with tension, and the whispers from the ocean grew louder, more insistent. It was as if the very walls were alive, echoing the secrets of those who had come before me. Then, one evening, the radio began to glitch. I was sitting in the lantern room, the dim light flickering as I attempted to tune into the Coast Guard. Instead of the usual static, I was met with a haunting distortion. The same three words repeated over and over, looping like a broken record. She wants it. My heart raced as I sat frozen, the words reverberating in my mind. Who was she? What did she want? I felt a chill creep down my spine, and I quickly turned off the radio, hoping to silence the ominous message. But the unease lingered, gnawing at my insides. The townsfolk had grown increasingly distant. When I ventured into town for supplies, I was met with wary glances and hushed whispers. The grocer, a burly man with a thick beard, spat at my boots when I approached his counter. "Blackrock's cursed," he muttered, his voice low and gravelly. The previous keeper? Hargrove wasn't the first, just the only one who got out alive. His words hung in the air like a dark cloud, and I felt a wave of anger and frustration wash over me. I had dismissed Hargrove's warnings as the ramblings of a madman, but now I couldn't shake the feeling that there was truth in what the grocer said. I laughed it off, trying to convince myself that it was just superstition, but deep down, I felt the weight of their fear pressing down on me. That night, as I sat in the lantern room, the shadows seemed to stretch and twist around me. I tried to focus on my tasks, but the unease was palpable. Then, I heard it, a woman's voice drifting up from the rocks below. At first, it was soft, almost ethereal, like a distant lullaby carried by the wind. I strained to listen, but there were no words, just a haunting melody that sent shivers down my spine. The humming resonated in a key that made my teeth ache, a dissonance that felt both beautiful and terrifying. I rushed to the window, peering out into the darkness, but the fog obscured my view. The voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, wrapping around me like a shroud. I felt an inexplicable pull, a desire to follow the sound, to uncover its source. But as I stood there, the weight of the old keeper's warnings flooded back to me. I remembered the journal entry, the words that had haunted me since I found it. Saw her. Now it's too late. I stepped back from the window, my heart racing. The melody continued, weaving through the night, and I felt a sense of dread settle in my stomach. What if this was the she the radio had warned me about? What if she was calling to me, luring me into the darkness? I shook my head, trying to dispel the fear that threatened to consume me. I had to stay strong, to resist the pull of whatever was out there. But as the singing continued, I felt the boundaries of my resolve begin to crumble. The truth was becoming clearer, but it was a truth I was terrified to confront. The lighthouse was not just a job. It was a gateway to something far more sinister, and I was standing on the precipice, teetering between curiosity and fear. I knew I had to uncover the secrets hidden within these walls, but at what cost? The night was alive with whispers, and I was beginning to understand that the darkness was not just outside, it was within me as well. Last night, the knocking changed. It was no longer the timid taps I had grown accustomed to, the soft raps that echoed through the stillness of the lighthouse. Now it was fists pounding against the door, thud, 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 like something desperate to escape, or perhaps something eager to enter. The sound reverberated through the walls, shaking me to my core, and I felt a primal fear clawing at my insides. I had sworn to myself that I wouldn't open the door after midnight, that I would heed Hargrove's warning. But the urgency in those knocks was unlike anything I had ever experienced. It was as if whatever was on the other side was pleading for release, begging for me to let it in. The peephole? I don't use it anymore. I had looked through it yesterday, and what I saw still haunted me. I had expected darkness, perhaps a shadow or a trick of the light, but instead, I was met with a face, her face, pale as drowned flesh, with eyes that seemed to pierce through the very fabric of my soul. She smiled, but it was a smile that twisted my stomach into knots, revealing too many teeth, sharp and glistening in the dim light. Her mouth moved, and I could hear her voice, soft yet commanding. "Let me in before the tide comes." The words wrapped around me like a cold embrace, and I felt my heart race as I stumbled back from the door, my breath hitching in my throat. Hargrove's warning rattled in my skull, a relentless echo that refused to fade. What knocks after midnight isn't human. I had dismissed it as the ramblings of a man driven mad by isolation, but now, standing in the lantern room, I felt the weight of his words pressing down on me. The tide was rising, I realized, the ocean's relentless pull threatening to engulf the lighthouse. I could hear the waves crashing against the rocks below, a rhythmic reminder of the danger that lurked just outside. But what was more terrifying was the realization that I was not just facing the ocean. I was facing something far more sinister. But the worst part? I'm turning the doorknob. My hand trembled as I reached for the cold metal, the weight of my decision hanging heavy in the air. I could feel the warmth radiating from the door, a stark contrast to the chill that enveloped me. Every instinct screamed at me to stop, to turn back, but curiosity and fear battled within me. What if she was telling the truth? What if I was the only one who could save her? As the knob turned slowly, I felt a rush of adrenaline. The door creaked ominously, and I hesitated, my heart pounding in my chest. I was teetering on the edge of a precipice, caught between the desire to uncover the truth and the instinct to protect myself from the unknown. In that moment, I realized that whatever lay beyond the door was not just a choice, it was a reckoning. I was about to confront the darkness that had haunted this lighthouse for decades, and I could only hope that I was prepared for the consequences of my actions. The tide was coming, and so was she.